Awesome. Um, Hello and welcome everyone to another talk series that we're doing with the Cultural Evolution Society. Today, please welcome Dr. Tim Waring. He's an associate professor of social-ecological systems modeling at the University of Maine. He also heads the Applied Cultural Evolutionary Laboratory. His research focuses on how social norms, institutions, and societies have evolved in response to socio-ecological forces in order to help build durable, sustainable, and just societies. So welcome, Dr. Tim. I think I've used a lot of big words. Do you want to break them down for us and tell us very simply what is it that you do? What is it that you study?
Sure. Yes, thank you. Right. I put a lot of big words in the bio in order to make it sound fancy.
Of course, that's what we all do.
I study human behavior and interaction in environmental context. And the big question there, right, in these days is when do we use the environment in a way that will allow us to keep using it, and when do we not?
Mhm.
And then, yeah. So that's my general topic area. And I study that in a couple of different ways. I specifically study the evolution of human culture and institutions and behaviors and technology and the way those relate to and control and define our resource use or our impact on the environment. Yeah, so that's in a nutshell, as you said. Uh, but
Could you ground
yeah,
it
go
by
ahead.
giving an example? Could you ground
Sure,
it by
right.
giving an
Yeah,
example? Yeah.
so sure, absolutely. One of the key questions in this whole field, which I've studied as well, is the question of we know that humans use resources and we can use a lot of them. And so the challenge for us as groups, when we're so sort of powerful in the environment, we're able to consume far more than the environment has in a lot of cases, is the question of when we end up not over-consuming environmental resources. And this goes back to a lot of the work of people like Eleanor Ostrom, who found a bunch of sort of common factors and institutional principles that groups tend to exhibit when they tend to manage resources more sustainably. And my interest in this is then how, if these institutions are the solution for achieving a sustainable environmental impact or environmental use level, then the question should be, how do we get those institutions and how do we keep them? And so that's where cultural evolution comes in. And so, for example, I've studied irrigation systems and forestry to a little extent in Tamil Nadu. I've studied
Mm.
the evolution of the natural resource industries here in Maine, including lobsters and the blueberry industry. And all of these tend to show patterns where uh, the way that resources are managed, when they are managed, it tends to be an emergent process of group level organization, which can be described both as development and also as cultural evolution, depending on how you look at it. And it certainly involves an evolutionary process in human culture over time. So those are some of the examples of the things that I've studied. I also study other things that are related to the evolution of human culture. I study the evolution of cooperative organizations, for example, because the same principles are involved in managing a cooperative as there are sort of creating cooperative environmental governance. And so these things are very sort of related, and also a lot of the lessons can be connected and transported, but haven't been. Uh,
That's really interesting. So my next question would be, because obviously irrigation and everything does require a lot of cooperation. I read a paper about Balinese irrigation systems by
yes, right.
I can't
Lansing,
remember the
Steve
name.
Lansing.
Lansing, correct,
There
and
you
that
go.
that requires yeah,
Yes.
and so it's related, right? Like how people upstream and people downstream have to cooperate with each other to make sure that, and they use religious systems to help them cooperate with one another.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And Steve Lansing's work is a great example of
Mm.
the complexity and difficulty of maintaining these systems. And Lansing has a sort of rich description of the way this complexity sort of emerges over time to form these sort of intricate connections between people and seasons and rainfall and sort of traditions around the water irrigation, traditional roles, um, and cultural practices that are very specific to a
Mm.
given environment, and that environment in Bali being his. And so I think that's a really good example of the way that cultural adaptation to the environment will give you not only perhaps an adaptive set of cultural practices, but also one that is locally specific. And of course, we see that in many, many, many different environments. We see the emergence of the kayak and collective hunting of whales and cetaceans by the Inuit through with kayaks, which is a very deadly way to hunt, but nonetheless is a traditional practice, and it's so very different than other life ways, and very specifically adapted to that environment. And so I think agriculture is one of the great examples of a place where you see very high levels of refinement of
Mm.
cultural adaptation, where human populations are very nicely adapted to their local environments. And so trying to use and understand cultural adaptation is another piece of it too. And so we're working on a project now, which is beginning to wrap up on the cultural adaptation in US agriculture to climate change. And so, climate change is this ongoing force, but it's sort of slow and, well, it's not slow by any geological sense, but for the day to day changes in, over the course of a lifetime of a farmer, it might be hard to detect very small weather differences. But, farmers are always switching their crops based on what might be more popular or sell better. And so we look at these changes to see how and to what degree farmers are adapting generally. Generally, farmers adapt their crops a lot. And what's interesting about that is that because crops are a species, we tend to think about them as, a part of the ecosystem that people manage. And that's true, but their distribution in time and space is not the result of regular ecological processes, right? It is the result of the choices of the farmer, and those choices are influenced by the cultural context and the learning that that farmer has done socially from others. So crops are expressed in time and space as a cultural trait. So the easiest way to understand what a crop is it's a cultural trait. It's a choice that the farmer planted it there, and the farmer might make a different choice based on what she learns from her neighbors. So when you understand that crops evolve culturally, not the genes of the crops, although genetically modified organisms' genes evolve culturally, but just their expression in time and space is a cultural evolutionary process. Then you can start to look at how it's changed. And farmers do a really good job of changing crops in order to get crops that produce the most, of course. And that's no surprise because this is what we do. We have entire systems about it. But there's also, the possibility that we manage those crops in such a way that we are slowly adapting to climate change as it goes. In fact, we are finding evidence that that does happen and is possible, although it's not super
Mhm.
strong.
That's really interesting. My next question would obviously be, what direction in which do you think change is occurring? Like, is it the environment that's influencing the choices that the farmers are making, or in general people are making, or do you think it's the choices that the farmers are making that is influencing the manner in which the crops develop, etc., etc.? And it's a more broader question, which is, in what direction does evolution happen? Do we adapt to the needs of the society, or is it that society, or the societal systems and institutions, adapt to our needs as we
Wait a
express
minute.
them?
I want to make sure I understand. I thought you were also putting you have individual society and the environment. Do you want me to answer which one of those? I feel like you're talking about the human systems adapting to the environment versus the environment responding to human, or is it individuals and society?
Correct. No,
Okay.
let's do human systems. I'm more interested in like human systems, and that even includes like agricultural systems and stuff like that. Like, what direction in which, what is the like, even in evolution, right? Like, I know this may be a silly question or may not be, but what is something that sparks the train of evolution in the first place? Like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Right, exactly. Well, I always like chicken and the egg problems because
Mm,
they're always a sign that it's an evolutionary process
mm,
to some degree. It can be a feedback process, right? But
mm.
but often when you're trying to explain complicated historical, right, social, historical, biological processes that have extended over a long period of time, and it's hard to know which of these two reinforcing factors came first. The answer is, of course, they've been co-evolving. And so for me, that's the important answer. When you find the chicken and egg, then you realize you found the important thing. It doesn't matter which one came first. What matters is that when they co-occur, they reinforce.
Mm.
And that's the evolutionary dynamic that is key. And again, it gives you the actual mechanics of what happens over time. So which happens more? Are you asking, do humans influence their environment more than their environment causes humans to fit to it?
Hmm.
That's an interesting question. It's a big question.
Yeah.
I think at the biggest scale, I would say our species is unbelievably ecologically successful. And the reason for that success is because we can adapt more rapidly and in more dimensions than every other species on the planet. And the reason we can do that is because we can evolve cultural solutions that are faster and that are shared between a large number of us. And so, therefore, are not limited to a single individual, but actually are a complex system of infrastructure or cooperative hunting or right, energy distribution. And so those processes of cultural evolution, which is group structured and more rapid than genetic evolution, give us this massive advantage. Now, of course, it's not just that, however. That is where I start. I think the pieces of social learning that our primate social ancestors had put us on the track to be able to adapt to the environment and make use of resources faster and more efficiently than our other, our competitors, right, in ancestral environments. But once we had culture and group structure really going for us, it's not just that we evolved more rapidly and at a group level in order to fit the environment. It's also that we started modifying the environment, of course. And we modified crop species, and we modified the land, and we modified the way the water flows, and the nature of the minerals and resources that we use. And so those are in ecology and evolutionary biology, that can be considered niche construction, where we build our own
Hmm.
ecological niche, like, for example, beavers do, except we build cities and agricultural fields. And so the answer, of course, is a bit of both, right? Of course, it's a wonderful feedback. But I want to put out a plug that in studying the evolution of social ecological systems generally, we're really at the beginning of that. Not only are we at the beginning of understanding how social ecological systems evolve, but we don't really know that humans are able to manage them sustainably, really kind of at any scale. So awesome examples of groups in Nepal who manage community forest and irrigation in Mexico. Those examples are all focused around a specific single environmental resource. And in all cases, the human villages and populations that are using those resources are also using other things. And they're always also connected to a much larger network on which they depend, not just for other materials and food stuff and energy, but also for knowledge and the systems that they use to survive. And so what we don't know is, can these two things be balanced? It's very clear that we can take over the planet, even given a small starting population. And it's also very clear that we can consume too much of various things or pollute it. It's not clear that at any scale, even small scales, the number of people who can maintain a population without over consuming aspects of the environment is also a number of people that can sort of maintain our relatively sophisticated lifestyle. And so that remains a major open question. Certainly, it doesn't seem to be the case at the size of the planet.
Yeah, that was going to be a question you would end with, but let's bring it up now, which is, do you think cultural evolution can explain um the climate crisis in that
Yeah, sure, in a general way.
in a general way, because it seems non-adaptive in the long term.
In the long term, right?
Yes, yeah, but we still
Exactly.
overconsume and we over utilize resources.
Right.
Yeah,
And I think,
which
but I
should
think
seem
this is where an evolutionary approach to understanding human behavior is really useful, because
okay.
it's easy to feel dispirited when you see us, burning through our remaining parts per million to keep a habitable planet. And it feels like, wow, guys, we know the answer and we're not doing it. And so the world is awful and people are awful. And I think when you take a step back and realize that we are a fancy social primate that just emerged onto the scene, and we've happened onto a number of basically ecological traps, right? So, and fossil fuels are the biggest ecological trap that we've found so far. And often, what we do when we exploit a new resource, first we discover the new resource and then we use it. And then we often overexploit it to the extent that it causes some problems. And only when it causes problems do we start to develop, and I would say culturally evolve, the institutions to regulate its use and to regulate its
Mm,
impact. And so
mm,
it's a very, very ubiquitous pattern.
mm,
In fact, the etymology, the original German word from which the English word sustainability is derived, only came after I think it was the 1400s, maybe it was the 1600s. German forestry got out of control. They basically cut down too many trees, and then they were sad that they had lost the forest, and so they sort of then came up with this idea of like, hey, maybe we should have a forest keeping idea.
mm,
Right. So these ideas only occur to us. So if we put that in perspective, we've now got to the scale of a planet. We didn't know, even when you include fossil fuel companies being knowing ahead of time and hiding it, right? Even when you
mm,
include that, we've only been using fossil fuels for a very short amount of time. So it's not surprising that we haven't really done a good job regulating them, but they are an ecological trap when we have a very thin atmosphere. So yes, adaptive in the short term and an ecological trap in the long term. Um, so yes, and then of course, all of the technology that we've created to use and extract, and process fossil fuels has evolved culturally, improving over time. Cars now can go faster and further on the same amount of gas than they used to, and that's not the result. It is the result of design and engineering, but that design and engineering is cumulative, and it only gets better over time because we have studied the previous designs and figured out how to make them marginally better each time.
mm.
So, right, yeah. So I think that's a one way to look at the sort of climate
Yeah,
crisis from a cultural
yeah.
evolutionary perspective. It doesn't give us the answer
Mm.
of where to go next.
In terms of prediction, in terms of just the way we are adaptive in nature, the word cumulative cultural brain. I don't know. I think Michael Mutakusha had come out with a paper about
Yes,
something like that. So now that we have it, now that we're really good at organizing ourselves and developing solutions, etc., do you think there is hope for the climate crisis to be reversed enough that it's no longer an imminent problem? Or do you think it has to be a constant imminent problem for us to constantly develop systems and methods to work against it? Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. In my mind, and I'm going to recast your question because I think it's a very good question. Another way of saying what I think your question is that so we've been adapting and building solutions to environmental problems in ever more sophisticated ways with our large distributed collective brain, right? Through cumulative cultural adaptation. And it includes the fancy devices through which we're talking now. So, can that process just continue going? And will that solve the climate crisis? Or do we need to do something else? Is there a reason why it won't work this time? And I think that's an unanswered question, even in theory. I'm working to try to answer that question better from a theoretical perspective. But I think there are multiple reasons to be hopeful because, on the one hand, we clearly know how to design a solution. But of course, designing a solution in the head of a few people is not the same thing as changing the system to make it work. We can do direct air capture. It's not very efficient. It's possible to create a carbon tax. Very few have, and so on. The other question that gets tied up in this is who is creating the solution and how does it get implemented? And what are the feedbacks on individuals or groups that are implementing solutions? And do those feedbacks allow the solutions to spread? And that's where it starts to get more complex. So, there's a I think there's a fundamental problem with regards to how we manage the biosphere in some ways. And this is going to be my final sort of version of your question, and then I think that will give us a good distinction
Mm,
to look at. The problem, if we, like I have submitted to you, if we solve our environmental problems after they become challenges,
mm,
generally, and maybe that can be not true this time for some reason. let's just take it as a given. Then, as climate change mounts, maybe we can solve this as the costs start to rack up. And I
Mm,
think we will try harder and harder as it starts to get worse and worse. But there's a key set of challenges, and that is governing a global biosphere or an atmosphere is probably a lot more complex than it might at first seem. Granted, we're just trying to govern the carbon aspect
mm,
of the atmosphere. So maybe that's easier, and it's maybe mostly just the atmosphere. But governing the biosphere, which is not that far from imagination now, is probably necessary if we want to stay on the planet in a nice way. And the problem with that is what sort of organizations, what sort of human groups are capable of expressing, well, let me take one step back. In order to govern the biosphere effectively and to manage it and to regulate its function, which we have to do because we're already using it at a level which requires that, you need complex technical and social and legal systems. This is undisputed. The types of human groups that are capable of expressing those fancy technical, social, and legal systems, those cultural traits for environmental management, at the scale of the planet has to be planetary scale groups. We don't really, outside of the UN, which is not very strong, we don't really have those, right? We have a lot of sub-global groups. And those sub-global groups is where the action is. That's where cultural evolution is happening. Nations look to other nations to see what they're doing. So in a very, I think, high level, we lack the right population structure to naturally evolve the way we have to solve other problems. We don't have a population of planets to be able to look at other planets and see how they manage their atmospheres. So we have to do it in a bottom-up way where we cooperate in order to solve it the right way the first time among the people who are here. So
mm.
that's, I think, a kind of answer to your problem about which way is it going to go. Either way, we will respond when the costs get high. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is maybe a selfish question based on my interest, but do you think there is any system, any global system that can conjure up global cooperation, perhaps religion?
I thought you would go there because I know what your interests are.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, sure. So let me come to the religion thing after just start touching on something else first,
yeah, yeah.
which is how do we use the evolution of culture to affect positive social change? And this is only just starting because the science of cultural evolution is still quite new. But I think a lot of us believe that there are ways in which a cultural evolutionary theory set and insights from it are integrative in a way that gives us a better understanding of the way the entire system changes, because it includes aspects from psychology and economics and anthropology and can integrate with the natural sciences. So the question is how? How can we use an applied science of cultural evolution to create beneficial social change? And I think there are a couple of key tent poles in that effort. I think the first one is understanding that culture is transmitted between people.
Mm, mm,
This is basic, right? So human social
mm,
learning is very important, but also often kind of neglected because most of human behavior is influenced by some kind of social learning, right? Our behavior is so deeply steeped in cultural transmission. And the problem is cultural transmission is basically ubiquitous, powerful, complex, but also invisible and very easy to fail to measure, right? So that's the first one. The second one, of course, is the processes that lead to cultural adaptation and accumulative, right, improvement over time. And the third one is the processes that give us the evolution of governance, which is where I've spent most of my time. And I think if you use these and perhaps more, you can start to see how we might be able to build a science that can work to create positive social change. Now, the question that you asked about is there a system that we could use to grow global cooperation? Sure. But I want to point out that there are many. And so I think the
mm.
question is actually a little bit flawed, not in spirit, but only technically, right? So,
No, no, yeah,
yeah, one of the ways that you can characterize, say, the climate crisis is to say, hey, this is an 8 billion person, social dilemma. Everyone has to be a cooperator in order for it to get solved. Well, guess what? That level of, it's game theory is stacked against us if we're just
yeah,
playing a 7 or 8 billion person social dilemma. We'll never achieve that. But thankfully, we're not. We only have, a few 200, and something countries. We're actually playing perhaps a social dilemma with a much smaller group of agents or individuals or entities. So first, that's one way to look at it. But that also then brings us to this next level, and importantly, right? It's always the case that environmental change, right? Environmental problems are group level problems. And the solutions to environmental problems are group level solutions, right? They include behavior and institutions both, and you need both of them to get the system to work. So for climate change, you need people to be not burning fossil fuels. But in order to make that happen, you need to make fossil fuels cost more and make the other alternatives cheaper and put in rules to support that and put in the infrastructure to make it happen. So it's a group level solution. So when you come to your question of religion, I'll say sure. But also, I want to point out that doesn't necessarily put it in any kind of good camp. So yes, could religion spread cooperation? Yes, religion has spread cooperation very much around the world. And I think there's some very good arguments that religion has helped to create us into the sort of very pro-social species that we are. But also, so has warfare. And as I like to point out, the fastest way to solve climate change is to take over the Earth. Right? A single powerful country could stop our climate change, problems by militarily conquering the majority of the planet and then enforcing, their rules upon everybody. We can, and so, that's coercion. Uh, but it also is the same sort of processes by which humans have made people do things for a long time. So obviously, I don't think that's a good way to go. But I want to point it out because it's already a geopolitical issue, and it's likely, I think, in your lifetime and possibly my lifetime that we will see geopolitical interactions and military interactions over the climate, which is dangerous because if we fight over it, it seems like it's the wrong way to go. We want to be able to cooperate over it, right? So, however, at the same time, if your question, and I think your general question here is, how do we grow cooperation from the scale that it's at now all the way up to the globe? I think the idea is using groups that have strong boundaries, but that are designed to grow and designed to include more and more. So, economic groups where you have, like the wonderful European CBAM mechanism. It's the carbon border adjustment mechanism, where there's a carbon tariff, and you can make those mechanisms stronger and include more and more economies in them. And that, because it's already starting from a big group, more countries will want to join in order to get the economic benefits, but have to decarbonize as a result. And so that's one way to create a spreading group which is cooperating on climate. Another way to do that, which I think we might be likely to see, is in a military carbon treaty, which does the same thing, which says, we're going to do this and it's not going fast enough, whatever it is, NATO or the EU or whatever, says we will all be carbon negative or neutral or whatever. And you all need to be too. And we're going to be expanding the boundary and you should join. And if you don't join, then, you're our enemies. That's obviously more grim, but it's also one of these mechanisms that we might see come into.
It's really interesting. Probably like a hot 30 seconds. I'm going to put it up on Instagram and TikTok, and hopefully this will blow up. Is religion better or warfare?
Yes, that's right. Exactly. And so the downside to religion, so the positive side of religion is that, potentially you can just use it to sort of get people into a shared, social identity, and that can underpin their desire to cooperate. And so it can be effectively cost-free. The downside, of course, is that, as we know, religion doesn't spread to the level of the planet. It is also a subglobal phenomenon. And even if we did have one religion that spread to the whole planet, it wouldn't take long before it would separate. And then we would have different religions. Because religion is fundamentally based on social identity, and social identities always do better when there is a different social identity to compare yourself to.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And plus, religions evolved to also support the local environmental niches, like something that you look at. So either way, it would separate. So this is really, really cool. I want to come back to a basic question, which is, where did your interest in this start, actually? Which is probably something I should have asked first. And it speaks to my horrible interviewing skills.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
that's a
where did
wonderful
this
question.
interest even start? Yeah,
Where did my interest in cultural evolution start?
cultural evolution and even the specific domain of cultural evolution even come from.
I see. Well, from the time I was a kid, a child, I've always been interested in the environment. And when I learned about evolution in depth in secondary school and in high school, I just loved it.
Mm,
And I loved everything about the way that evolutionary theory gives us a way to understand the complexity and diversity and sophistication of a biological world. And then in college, I was disappointed by the social sciences. I took an economics class, I took an anthropology class, and I didn't get around to taking a psychology class because I didn't hear good things. But I took I should have, but
it's true.
uh, and um, they were they were unsatisfying. And so for me, it's one of I came to cultural evolution as it was sort of starting to gain more ground in the late '90s and early 2000s. Around that time, the idea of memes hadn't become what we
Wait,
consider cat pictures
sorry.
on the
You
internet
mean
today.
memes as in a cultural meme? Or do we mean memes as in an internet meme?
Right. Well, of course, internet memes got their name from the cultural meme, which comes from Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene. And the last chapter is a wonderful chapter and introduces that idea of a cultural replicator and gives it this name, this cute name. And so,
Name.
yeah. So when, memes were being considered by academics as, hey, maybe this is something that we can use. That's how I first discovered this. And so I was so unsatisfied with not only, um, these ways to study culture that the social sciences give us, which are really, I mean, they're an embarrassment, right? Because they're, well, I mean, it really is. If you're in a regular
Yeah,
social science, you should be embarrassed for your discipline because you really should. You really should because you're not speaking the same language as other people who are studying the same species. And there's only one set of behavior and there's only one study species. And if you can't have the same theories and if you can't use the same language and methods, you're not doing your science very well. And that's the case for all of the social sciences. They're not living up to their promise. And so it's such a letdown, right? When you want to study the complexity of the human species, which is so fascinating and so rich and diverse. And then you take an intro anthro class. And so that's cool because there's some diversity, but it doesn't get into the math. If you want math, you go to the economics. And then you realize that they are using their math and they're basing it on, just this unchecked assumption of rational action all the time, and they're not willing to really change that. And then you say, well, maybe psychology, and psychology has lots of theories, but none of them are they don't come together. There's no central piece, and they don't talk to each other. So enough of criticizing them. That's the background where when I started to see that there was a science of cultural evolution that I could find and study, I got into it and I got excited and I tried to figure out how I could go to graduate school with these folks. So I wrote to Pete Richardson and Rob Boyd, and the rest is history. And so, but it also there's another piece
wait.
here.
Pete Richardson and Rob Boyd are your supervisors?
Yes, Pete Richardson was my supervisor.
Legends.
Yeah, it's true.
Literally.
Pete's great. So is Rob, but Pete's my advisor. Pete's great. Um, and so, but there's another piece of it with regards to the environment here. So my first job out of college was to work in the Florida Everglades and to help with the restoration project of the Floridian Everglades. After being there for a couple of years, I came to realize that we have all of the ecological knowledge that we need in order to restore the Everglades, period. We can just do it. I mean, we have to hire some bulldozers and we need to take out the farms that are producing the excess phosphorus runoff. But we can do this. But despite the fact we had a $7 billion federal state project to make it happen, the political will to enact those changes and to make the system function in a way that is roughly equivalent to what it used to be was just not there. And we were never able to sort of go back and take the sugarcane fields, which were providing this runoff, which is changing the nutrient cycling in the Everglades. We're never able to do that. Still aren't, still hasn't happened. And so I became fascinated with this question of why have we not implemented the science when we know the science is there and the science can give us the solution? And so, therefore, how is it that humans work? And I became very
Mm.
interested in how humans work and how they manage, how they come to manage the environment the way they do. So, those two things I think
So
came together.
essentially, we need cooperation despite having all the science. You need to get humans to
Yes,
work together and have a shared goal
yes,
to come
yes.
together.
So if I can say, can I say a couple of things about this though?
Yeah,
So
of
my
course.
first interest is, as I mentioned, I'm interested in just the phenomenon of cultural evolution itself because it's completely novel and crazy, right? So we are this species that is doing something that is so weird, right? And if you're not sort of creeped out by how weird we are as a thing on this planet, I think you're not looking at what we are, with the right perspective.
Mm.
And we've taken over the planet in the blink of an eye. We definitely don't know what we're doing, although we're also clearly very sophisticated.
Yeah.
And so, right. So, I'm interested in that on one hand, but then you said we have to cooperate, and my answer would be like, yes, we do. But also, cultural evolution gives us ways to start explaining how and when, well, gives us a lens that helps us explain important things. So, for example, the difference between technological change and social change. So technological change tends to be very cumulative. When we invent a new system or a new tool, it tends to spread very widely. It tends to be used, and then we refigure everything we do based on the fact that we have this new tool. And that's not the way social change works. Non-technological social change tends to depend on institutions and cooperation reinforcing each other. And when social identities shift or other things shift, those things can just fall apart, right? And so what's nice about the science of cultural evolution is it gives us a way to understand how that happens. It gives us a
Mm.
way to understand why that is the way it happens. And, currently societies tend to last only around 300 years or something on average. We wear out. Our social institutions are not durable like our technology
Mm.
is. And that's important to know.
Yeah, I'm sold. I'm sold on cultural evolution. I think I'm going to take it as my career path. Quickly, I know we're short on time, so I'm going to ask you to do a shameless plug, which is
Okay.
why should people join the Cultural Evolution Society?
Okay, marvelous. I have a couple
Yes,
thoughts on this.
yes,
The first thing is the thing that I've just said. If you're not very confused about what humans are,
yeah,
you're asking the wrong question. I think most people should be. I think cultural evolution gives us a lot of ways to understand that. Why should you join the society? I just was at the Cultural Evolution Society meetings in Durham, and they were fantastic. And my reflections were this is a young scientific society with very diverse backgrounds. It's increasingly globally diverse. There's a long tail of people from all sorts of countries involved. We are studying diverse topics, right? Well, I saw talks on the social learning of capuchin nut cracking, phylogenetic analysis of Gregorian chants, rice farming and collectivism in Japan, cultural evolution of literature, gender role ideology change among Tanzanian men, American religious sermon content, right? Cultural adaptation to climate change, right? So all of these very diverse topics that span all of the social sciences and connect with the natural sciences. So it has the possibility to be the integrative human science. And also, it's super rigorous. So there are cutting edge methods. There's Bayesian stuff, phylogenetic methods. There's agent simulation. There's experiment. There's mathematical formal modeling. There's all sorts of very rigorous tools that people are using, and it pulls together all of these. And then finally, there are a bunch of growing application domains. So I've been working on, applying this to the environment. There are angles where people are looking at health and education, and sort of governance, or inequality, things like this generally. And so, yeah, so the society is a very strong and wonderful young society, and we, in terms of our life on the planet as a species, we need a science of the human species that connects us to the natural world. And this is that science. That science is cultural evolution.
yeah. That's a solid fit, and that's exactly also why I joined it as a young member of CES, if I can say so myself. Awesome, Tim. Thank you for joining us. And hopefully we'll chat more soon. We'll do another talk series. But
Sounds
thank you
good.
for your time today.
My
Um,
pleasure, Farrell. Thank you so much.